There are moments in history when the ordinary becomes extraordinary. When a simple action, a knock of a hammer, a push of a wall, a curiosity that cannot be ignored, opens a doorway to something so vast, so ancient, so deliberately hidden that it challenges everything we think we know about human civilization. This is one of those moments. In 1963, in the small Turkish town of Derinkuyu, a man was renovating his home. He was doing what countless homeowners do throughout the world, making repairs, modernizing, preparing his dwelling for his family. But as he worked in his basement, knocking down an old wall to create more space, something unexpected happened. The wall gave way to reveal not another room but an opening, a threshold into darkness. He stepped through, and the darkness seemed to expand with each step. One room led to another. That room opened into a corridor. The corridor descended deeper, and then deeper still. He had discovered something that would transform our understanding of human desperation, human ingenuity, and human fear. Behind that wall in his basement was an entire city. Not a small settlement, not a refugee camp, a city. An intricate, planned, deliberately constructed underground metropolis that stretched 18 stories beneath his feet. As you lie in the darkness of your own bedroom tonight, imagine this. Beneath a modest home in Turkey lay the capacity to shelter 20,000 people. 20,000 souls. That city contained churches with ornate carvings, schools where children learned to read, stables where animals were kept, wine presses where farmers fermented their harvest, ventilation shafts that descended 180 feet through solid rock to bring fresh air to the lowest levels. It contained stone doors so cleverly engineered that they could only be opened from the inside. Doors designed to lock out the world, and yet, for centuries, perhaps for longer than we can measure, no one on the surface knew it was there. The revelation that followed would unravel one of the most haunting mysteries in the history of human civilization. Derinkuyu was not unique. Archaeological teams would soon discover that beneath the red earth and the otherworldly landscape of Cappadocia, Turkey, there existed not just one underground city, but over 200 of them. 200 hidden worlds, carved from volcanic rock, some of them connected by miles-long tunnels that snaked through the earth like the passageways of an enormous anthill. The largest underground network ever discovered by modern archaeology. A subterranean empire that had been invisible to the surface world for centuries. As you settle deeper into your pillow tonight, let your mind rest on this question. What could force an entire civilization to abandon the sunlight? What could terrify a people so profoundly that they would spend generations, decades, centuries perhaps, carving entire cities from solid rock with hand tools and stone chisels? What horror dwelt on the surface that seemed less daunting than the prospect of living in total darkness? This is the underground city paradox. It is a mystery that spans thousands of years, that touches on ancient empires and forgotten religions, on warfare and survival, on the depths of human desperation and the heights of human engineering. It is a story about fear, but also about something else, something calmer, something more profound. It is a story about choosing your shelter, about choosing where you belong, and that is where we find ourselves tonight, in the darkness of our own safe spaces, contemplating the darkness that others chose for themselves. The people who built these cities were not primitive. They were not crude or unsophisticated. They were in many ways far more advanced in their thinking than we might assume. The engineering alone would astound architects today. Massive rolling stone doors carved from single blocks of rock, some weighing as much as a modern automobile, hung in doorways and positioned so that they could be rolled into place from inside the city, sealing the entrances against the outside world. The ventilation system was a marvel of ancient engineering, shafts that penetrated through layers of rock, calibrated to pull fresh air down from the surface and distribute it throughout the city, keeping the deeper levels from becoming suffocating tombs. Water wells were strategically positioned between levels, managed and shared in a way that suggests careful planning, rationing, and community cooperation. Every element of these cities speaks to intentionality, to design, to knowledge, to fear, yes, but also to hope. Hope that if they could just survive long enough underground, somehow, some way, the danger above would pass. But who were these people, and when did they build? This is where our story becomes even more complex, even more layered, like the geological strata of the Earth itself. The landscape of Cappadocia, the region where these underground cities were discovered, is one of the most unusual geological zones on Earth. Millions of years ago, massive volcanic eruptions created a blanket of volcanic ash and pumice across the region. Over time, this material hardened into a soft, porous rock called tuff. But the cooling process was uneven, and weathering and erosion created something extraordinary. The landscape is dotted with thousands of cone-shaped rock formations that the locals call fairy chimneys, towering spires of stone that rise from the earth like something from a dream. Some reach nearly 200 feet into the air. They stand clustered together, creating a landscape so surreal, so otherworldly, that many travellers have described it as more alien than terrestrial. But here is what makes Cappadocia truly special. What transforms it from a geological oddity into something uniquely suited to human habitation in hiding. The soft, tough rock is remarkably easy to carve. Unlike granite or limestone, which require tremendous effort to shape, tuff can be worked with relative ease using simple tools, a pick, a chisel, time, patience, and desperation. The rock holds its shape. It does not crumble when water passes through it. It is strong enough to support the weight of multiple levels stacked upon one another. It is, in essence, a perfect canvas for someone who needs to carve a city from nothing. And this raises the question that will guide us through the rest of our exploration tonight. What series of events, what accumulation of fear and necessity would drive someone to take advantage of this geological gift in such an extreme way? What would motivate entire populations, not just individuals, but families, communities, civilizations, to trade the sky for stone? The answer lies in a particularly turbulent chapter of human history. The period roughly between the 7th and 10th centuries was a time of tremendous upheaval in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant. It was an era when empires rose and fell, when religions clashed, when the line between refugee and invader became blurred and complicated. Waves of invasion, migration, and conflict swept across the region with devastating frequency. In Cappadocia specifically, there were raids by Tatar tribes from the east, conflicts with Arab forces, religious persecution, bandits who roamed the countryside hunting for vulnerable settlements. The surface quite simply became dangerous. The surface became a place where your family was not safe, your home was not secure. The world above ground had become a place where you could lose everything. The response of the people of Cappadocia was, in hindsight, a kind of desperate genius. Rather than migrate further, rather than seek refuge in distant lands, they looked down. They looked at the earth beneath their feet, at the soft rock that could be shaped and carved, and they made a decision. They would go underground. They would create artificial warrens, artificial caves, artificial mountains of stone that could hide their families, protect their food stores, shelter their animals, and potentially sustain them through months of siege or danger. What emerged over centuries was a complex subterranean society. Derinkuyu, the city discovered by accident in 1963, represents perhaps the most sophisticated example, but it is far from alone. Cappadocia is another of the largest underground cities, with 8 main levels and connections to nearby settlements. Uskonak, Gaziemir, Mazi, Uchisa. The names repeat across the Cappadocia region, like a roll call of a hidden civilization. Some of these cities were connected by tunnels stretching for miles, creating a network so vast that historians and archaeologists are still not entirely certain they have explored all of it. Some of the tunnels are so low that you must crawl to pass through them. Others are high enough to stand, suggesting they were travel routes regularly used by people moving between settlements. The social structure that supported these cities was equally sophisticated. In a space as constrained as an underground city, every person had a role. There were priests to tend to the churches carved into the stone walls. There were teachers in the stone schoolrooms. There were farmers who carefully cultivated what crops could grow in the limited light that filtered through air shafts. There were blacksmiths and toolmakers. There were people whose entire job was to maintain the wells and the water systems. There were guardians of the great doors, those massive rolling stones that protected the entrances. What must that have been like? To spend your entire life in darkness, to teach your children to walk without seeing the sun, to plan your meals around the careful rationing of stored grain and dried fruit. To hear, from time to time, footsteps and voices above you, sounds from the outside world that you had deliberately chosen to leave behind. The psychological weight of such an existence is almost impossible to imagine from our perspective. We are creatures of light. We have evolved for sunlight. Our bodies crave it. Our minds need it. And yet these people, driven by fear, by the need to protect their families, found a way to endure the darkness. They found a way to make it bearable. They carved churches into the stone and drew symbols and figures that suggest they maintained their faith and their spiritual practices even in the depths of the earth. They created governance structures that allowed their underground cities to function as cohesive societies. This is the paradox that gives our story its name and its central question. These were not barbaric refuges. These were not crude hiding places scratched out by desperate, irrational people. These were engineered marvels. These were experiments in alternative living, in human resilience, in the capacity of communities to reorganize themselves around a central trauma. Someone had to design these cities. Someone had to envision how the air would flow, where the water would come from, how the doors would function. Someone had to make the decision about which levels would be residential, which would be for storage, which would be for animals. Someone had to think about the future, not just about surviving the next raid, but about sustaining a civilization that might remain underground for years or even generations. As you lie in the quiet darkness of your bedroom tonight, imagine the builders of Derinkuyu. Imagine them descending into the earth with their tools, beginning to shape the rock. Imagine the echoing sound of picks against stone, resonating through the chambers that would one day shelter thousands. Imagine the first families moving into the carved apartments, their possessions arranged in rooms that had never seen sunlight. Imagine them learning to navigate by touch and by intuition, developing a relationship with the space around them that did not depend on sight. Imagine them creating community and meaning in a place that, by all rights, should have been a tomb. The story of Derinkuyu and the underground cities of Cappadocia is not a story of defeat. It is not a story of people who lost and had nowhere else to go. It is a story of agency, of choice, of people taking control of their own survival in the face of overwhelming circumstances. It is a story about the home we build, not with materials and architects, but with intention and care. It is a story about the spaces we create to feel safe, and it is a story that, in the profound darkness of the night, invites us to contemplate our own relationship with light, with safety, with community, and with the homes that shelter us. In the following sections of our journey tonight, we will descend deeper into this mystery. We will explore the history that drove people underground. We will examine the engineering that made it possible. We will meet some of the inhabitants, not in person, of course, for they lived centuries ago, but through what they left behind. We will trace the tunnels that connected these cities, and we will contemplate what it must have meant to walk those passageways knowing that every step took you further from the sky. We will understand not just how these cities were built, but why, and what their existence tells us about human fear, human ingenuity, and human hope. But before we proceed, if the Calm Archive has become part of your bedtime routine, consider subscribing so you never miss a new upload, and so you can drift into sleep alongside us as we continue to explore the mysteries of history and the wonders of the past. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these stories to you, night after night, in the darkness. Now let us descend. Let us leave the surface world behind and enter the stone chambers that have waited in darkness for over 1,000 years. Let us find out what secrets the earth was keeping, and what truths were sleeping beneath our feet all along. To understand why Derinkuyu and its sister cities lay hidden beneath the Cappadocian landscape, we must journey back millions of years to a time when this corner of what is now Turkey was a far different world. Picture 3 massive volcanoes dominating the horizon: Mount Erciyes, Mount Hasan, and Mount Guludağ. These were not isolated peaks, but part of a vast volcanic system, active and unpredictable. Over countless millennia they erupted repeatedly, their violence relentless and transformative. Each eruption cast columns of superheated ash into the sky, and as this ash fell back to Earth, it blanketed the entire region in layers upon layers of particulate matter. Imagine the sky itself becoming grey, the light diffused and strange, the world being slowly buried beneath a growing blanket of volcanic dust. Yet this was not destruction alone. As those layers of ash accumulated, they compressed under their own weight, year after year, century after century, the tremendous pressure slowly fusing the particles together into a solid rock. This rock, called tuff, possessed a unique and wondrous property that would shape the entire destiny of human civilization in this region. It was soft enough to carve with simple tools, yet sturdy enough to endure once exposed. More remarkably still, freshly exposed tuff would gradually harden through contact with air, becoming increasingly durable and resilient with each passing season. This was the geological gift that Cappadocia possessed, a stone that seemed to invite human hands to shape it, the same erosion that would eventually create the whimsical fairy chimneys we see today, those delicate spires and cone-shaped formations that dot the landscape, also revealed the interior character of the tuff. Water and wind, those patient sculptors, slowly wore away softer layers while harder stone remained, carving the earth into an intricate three-dimensional puzzle of passages and caverns. And within this natural maze lay the perfect medium for those seeking refuge and sanctuary. The people who came to understand this land, generations upon generations, began to see what others might have overlooked, that the very stone beneath their feet was an invitation to create shelter, to build cities in the darkness. When that Turkish electrician's foot first broke through into the void beyond that wall in 1963, he entered a world that had been sealed away from sunlight for centuries. Standing in that threshold, allowing his eyes to adjust to the profound darkness, he would have glimpsed something that few had witnessed in all those years. The corridors stretched away in every direction, highways of stone carved by determined human hands. Some were wide and high, others narrow and intimate, creating a labyrinth whose depths and true extent remained unmeasured. Room opened into room, chambers of various sizes and purposes, their purposes still waiting to be deciphered. Storage chambers, perhaps, with their narrow openings designed to restrict access and preserve contents in the cool darkness. Living quarters where families once gathered, their voices echoing off stone walls. Chapels where the faithful had knelt to pray in the safest places they knew. All of it waiting, all of it preserved in the stillness and dark. And remarkably, almost impossibly, the ventilation system still functioned. Shafts had been carved with such precision that air still moved through this subterranean city, still flowed through channels that had not known human attention in centuries, perhaps longer. The fresh, cool air that the electrician would have felt on his face, that constant, barely perceptible breeze moving through the darkness, was itself a reminder of the ancient engineering, the sophisticated understanding of how to make an underground city breathable, livable, sustainable. It was a system so well designed that it required no maintenance, no pumps or mechanisms, just the patient physics of air pressure and temperature difference working across centuries. The true scale of what had been discovered only became apparent as exploration continued. Layer upon layer, level upon level, the city extended downward. 8 levels in total, each one descending deeper into the earth. Thousands of chambers, galleries and passages totaling many kilometers in length. And yet, even as archaeologists and historians began their careful work, they understood that they were only glimpsing a portion of what existed. Other underground cities surrounded Derinkuyu, Cappadocia to the north, and others more distant still, each connected by stories and perhaps by passageways yet unknown. All of them carved from this remarkable soft stone, all of them nestled in the depths of the earth like jewels hidden in a mine that had not been opened until the 20th century. As we prepare to descend deeper into the history of these underground cities, remember that we are walking through more than just stone and empty space. We are walking through the decisions made by countless individuals across centuries. Each corridor was carved by someone. Each room was deliberated upon and shaped with intention. Each ventilation shaft was planned and executed by people who understood their landscape intimately. And we, sitting in the quiet darkness of this moment, preparing ourselves for sleep and for the deeper journeys our minds will take, are connected across the span of time to those ancient inhabitants who also sought refuge in the earth, who also found comfort in cool stone and quiet darkness. The city that awaits us below is not just a marvel of ancient engineering, but a testament to the human capacity to imagine, to build, and to survive, even in the most unlikely of places. Imagine standing in the present day, gazing at the soft golden stone of Cappadocia's landscape. The fairy chimneys rise around you like ancient guardians, and beneath your feet lies a question that spans nearly 3,000 years of human history. How did these underground cities come to exist? Who carved these passages through solid rock? And what circumstances were so dire that entire civilizations chose to live in darkness rather than beneath the open sky? The answers, we'll discover, are woven into the very fabric of this region's survival through some of humanity's most turbulent eras. The story begins in the depths of antiquity, in a period when empires rose and fell with the turning of centuries. Around 1600 years before the birth of Christ, the Hittites emerged as one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. They were master builders and metal workers, controlling vast territories across Anatolia, the region we now call Turkey. The Hittite Empire was formidable, but it was not without enemies. To the south, the mighty kingdoms of Egypt threatened their borders. To the east, the rising power of Assyria cast its shadow across the land. In such times, when conflict was almost constant and security was a luxury few could guarantee, the people of Cappadocia discovered something remarkable in their landscape. The soft volcanic rock that formed their region, tough they would learn to call it, was almost perfect for carving. It was solid enough to hold its shape, yet soft enough for even ancient tools to shape. Perhaps accidentally, perhaps with deliberate intention, the earliest inhabitants of this region began to carve chambers and tunnels into the earth. These first excavations were modest by later standards, simple shelters that could provide refuge when raids came or when enemies approached from the horizon. We can only imagine the profound realization that must have struck those ancient peoples as they discovered that the earth itself could be shaped into a fortress. They were learning a secret that would transform their world, that survival sometimes meant going down rather than reaching up. For centuries, these early underground spaces remained relatively unchanged, known only to local populations and passed down through oral tradition and memory. But then came the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious and catastrophic event that reshaped the entire Eastern Mediterranean world. Around 1200 years before Christ, civilizations that had stood for centuries suddenly crumbled. The Hittite Empire, that great power that had battled Egypt and Assyria, fragmented and fell. The causes remain debated by historians even today: invasion, famine, climate change, systems collapse. But the effect was undeniable. The established order vanished, and into the vacuum came new peoples, new conflicts, and new uncertainties. It was into this world of chaos and displacement that the Phrygians emerged. These resourceful people, who brought with them superior iron tools and a fierce determination to survive, gradually moved into and expanded the civilization of Cappadocia. They inherited what the Hittites had begun, but they expanded it with purpose and ambition. The Phrygians understood something that the ancients had intuited, that the underground could be more than a mere shelter. With better tools and greater necessity, they began to create networks of chambers and passages. They carved storage areas to keep their grain and supplies safe from raiders. They created spaces where entire families could shelter when danger approached. They dug deeper, expanded further, and made the underground not a desperate refuge but a planned part of their civilization. For nearly 500 years, the Phrygians worked and refined these subterranean spaces, leaving their mark on a landscape that would continue to evolve. As centuries passed, the region's fortunes shifted with the tides of imperial power. The Persian Empire, under rulers like Cyrus and his successors, extended their dominion across Anatolia and into Cappadocia. The Persians, pragmatic administrators, recognized the value of the existing underground cities. They understood that control of the region required tolerance of its peculiar customs and defences. Under Persian rule, which lasted for several centuries, local populations continued to expand and refine their underground dwellings. The motivations remained similar: the need for security, the desire to preserve resources, the practical wisdom of keeping communities safe from invading armies and roving bands of soldiers. The underground cities grew more complex, more sophisticated, more integrated into daily life. Each layer of history added something new. Each civilization that came and went left its fingerprints on the stone walls. The underground was becoming not just a refuge, but a testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. But it was the early Christians who would truly transform the underground cities into something extraordinary. Beginning around the 1st century after Christ's birth and accelerating through the 4th century, Christians fleeing persecution by the Roman Empire began arriving in Cappadocia. They had heard of the underground cities, and they recognized in them not merely a shelter but a sanctuary. Here was a place where they could worship safely, away from the eyes of Roman soldiers and the threat of arrest or execution. What began as a desperate flight became an opportunity for spiritual and communal expression. The Christians did not simply hide in pre-existing caves and tunnels. Instead, they became master carvers themselves, expanding the underground cities with purpose and artistry. They carved churches with graceful columns and arches, all hewn from the living rock. They created baptisteries where the faithful could be initiated into their faith. They sculpted altars and carved out the chambers where religious ceremonies could take place. The rock itself became their canvas, and their faith became the inspiration for their labour. More than this, the Christians built entire communities underground. They were not creating mere shelters from persecution, but functioning cities, complete with schools where children could learn, communal kitchens where meals could be prepared and shared, storage chambers for food and water, living quarters for families and monks. Over 2 centuries, from roughly the 1st to the 4th centuries of the Christian era, these underground cities grew into remarkable feats of engineering and organisation. Thousands of people worked in these depths, their hands shaping the stone, their voices echoing through the passages as they worshipped and lived and built their lives in darkness and safety. It was here, beneath the earth, that early Christian communities found not only refuge but also an opportunity to develop their faith away from the influence of official Roman religion. The underground cities became centres of spiritual learning and practice, places where Christianity could flourish in a form relatively untouched by the compromises and politics of the surface world. By the 6th and 7th centuries, though, the nature of the threat changed. As Christianity spread and eventually became accepted, even favoured by the Roman and Byzantine empires, the original reason for hiding, religious persecution, began to fade. But new terrors arrived to take its place. Arab armies, expanding out of the newly unified Islamic world, began launching raids into Byzantine-controlled territories. Cappadocia, lying at the intersection of Byzantine and Arab power, became a frontier zone. Raids were constant and devastating. The Byzantines and Arabs fought not in a single decisive battle, but in a grinding war of attrition that would last for more than a century. The raids were terrifying in their frequency and destruction. One year might see calm, the next year might bring armies sweeping through the countryside, killing and taking captives, burning crops and villages. In such circumstances, the underground cities, which had evolved from emergency shelters to spiritual communities, suddenly took on a new and urgent purpose. They became places of true survival during the Arab-Byzantine wars of the 7th and 8th centuries. Imagine the experience of living during those tumultuous centuries. You would wake in the morning and scan the horizon for dust clouds that might indicate approaching armies. If the alarm was raised, perhaps a lookout stationed on the highest point would spot raiders in the distance. The entire population would spring into action. Families would gather their most precious possessions, their children, their elderly, their stores of food and water. They would move quickly toward the entrances of the underground cities, and then, in an act that seems almost theatrical in its deliberateness, massive stone doors, some of them enormous rolling discs that weighed hundreds of pounds, would be sealed shut. Entire populations, numbering in the tens of thousands, would retreat underground and wait for the danger to pass. In some cases, these underground refugees would shelter 20,000 people or more, entire populations sealed beneath the earth for weeks or even months at a time. During these periods of siege, for that is truly what they were, life continued in the depths. There was darkness broken only by candlelight and oil lamps. There was dampness and the sound of water dripping from stone. There was the constant background awareness that somewhere above, enemies were burning crops and destroying villages. But there was also community. There was the knowledge that your family, your neighbours, your entire people had survived. There was routine and structure. People ate from stored supplies, worked at tasks that could be done in dim light, prayed together, and maintained their faith. The children who were born in those underground chambers, who spent the first years of their lives in darkness before emerging to the Cappadocian sun, would grow up with a profound understanding of vulnerability and resilience. They would know in their bones that survival sometimes required sacrifice, that safety sometimes demanded descent into darkness. The underground cities reached the height of their use and sophistication during these Arab-Byzantine wars. The centuries of expansion by previous civilizations, the Hittites with their first intuition about underground safety, the Phrygians with their tools and determination, the Persians with their administrative oversight, The Christians, with their spiritual passion and engineering skill, had created systems of remarkable complexity. There were air shafts, some extending down 50 or more feet from the surface, that provided ventilation to chambers deep below. These were not crude holes, but carefully engineered passages that allowed the movement of air and sometimes the passage of water. There were passages connecting different underground cities so that if one entrance was blocked or compromised, alternate routes remained available. There were granaries and storage areas where food could be kept for extended periods. There were watering stations with access to underground springs and carefully collected rainwater. The communities that retreated underground were not facing primitive conditions, but had developed sophisticated systems that allowed them to survive for months while remaining sealed from the world above. The stone doors themselves were engineering marvels. Some were simple rolling discs rounded on the bottom that fit snugly into grooves cut into the tunnel walls on either side. A handful of people could roll these massive doors open or shut with a smooth stone surface reducing friction. Other entrances featured doors that could be rolled from side to side. Still others had more complex mechanisms. All of them shared a purpose. They could be sealed from within, making it nearly impossible for anyone outside to breach the entrance. If an enemy force discovered an underground city, they might find themselves facing solid stone, with no way to break through. The inhabitants, meanwhile, waited in the darkness below, protected not by walls or weapons, but by the sheer bulk of stone that surrounded them. What is perhaps most remarkable about the underground cities during this era is not their engineering or even their scale, but what they represent about human adaptation and determination. Here were communities that had learned to thrive in conditions that seem almost unimaginable to modern sensibilities. They did not merely survive underground, but created lives there. They worshipped and learned. They raised children and built social structures. They shared meals and maintained traditions. The darkness and confinement that would feel oppressive to us were simply part of existence, the price of safety and continuity. To live in a Cappadocian underground city during the Arab-Byzantine Wars was to participate in an act of defiance against the chaos of the outside world. It was to trust in the wisdom of your ancestors and in the remarkable properties of volcanic tuff that could be carved and shaped into shelter. The Arab-Byzantine Wars eventually ended, as all conflicts do. The intensity of raids diminished. The borders between the two empires stabilized, and while conflicts continued, the existential threat to the Cappadocian communities gradually lessened. Slowly, the underground cities were less fully populated. Some chambers were abandoned. Others continued to be used, but with less urgency. And yet, the legacy of what had been created remained. The underground cities stood as monuments to survival, as physical embodiments of the determination of countless generations to persist in the face of adversity. When we contemplate the history of Cappadocia's underground cities, we see not a single moment of creation, but rather a palimpsest of survival. Layer upon layer of human history is embedded in the stone. The Hittites taught the first lessons about going underground. The Phrygians expanded with tools and determination. The Persians brought administrative order. The Christians brought spiritual passion and architectural ambition. And the Byzantine populations brought the ultimate test, the need to seal themselves in darkness for months at a time while the world raged above them. Each civilization added something new, yet they were all responding to the same fundamental human drives: the desire to be safe, to preserve what you have built, to protect those you love, and to endure. In the quiet darkness of the underground chambers, thousands of people from different eras and cultures found ways to transform desperation into routine, fear into community, and the abyss into home. It was in these centuries of conflict, during the long struggle between empires, that the underground cities truly became sanctuaries. Picture the Cappadocian landscape in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, a land caught between two great powers, the Byzantine Empire to the west and the expanding Arab Caliphate to the east. Across the valleys and plateaus this border shifted like a tide, advancing and retreating with each passing year. And with each shift came fear, and with each fear came retreat. The approach of danger announced itself first as smoke. On the highest points of the landscape, on ridges and peaks visible for many miles in all directions, signal fires burned bright enough to be seen even in daylight. One fire meant caution. 2 fires meant the approach of a raiding party. 3 meant that great armies were coming. The watchers on these high places knew the languages of the sky. how to speak in flame across the distances, how to send news faster than any horse could carry it. In minutes, the warning reached the valleys. In minutes more, it reached the villages and the hidden entrances below. What followed was a carefully choreographed movement, refined across generations into something almost ritual in its precision. There was no panic, because panic is the response of those encountering something for the first time. These people had done this before. Their grandparents had done it. Their children would do it. From fields and workshops, from homes built on the surface where the light fell freely, families moved toward the entrance points. They brought what mattered most: grain stored in earthen vessels, dried fruit bundled in cloth, clay tablets of records, religious objects wrapped in wool, icons and manuscripts carefully guarded. They brought their livestock, goats and sheep, that would need to be fed during the months underground, their sounds eventually silencing as the weeks wore on. The livestock moved reluctantly down into darkness, urged gently by hands that knew how to move without aggression, without the sharp sounds that might cause panic to spread. Children walked between their parents, some of them old enough to remember the last retreat, others experiencing it for perhaps the third or fourth time in their young lives. And then there were the very young, the infants and toddlers born in the shelter of these carved halls, who had never known the sun except as a concept, a word spoken by their mothers, a warmth described but not truly experienced. The entrances, never large, grew smaller as people crowded through. The last to enter would pull the great rolling stone doors shut behind them, massive wheels of rock that had been grooved into channels over centuries of use. Some of these stones weighed as much as several horses standing together. They moved with surprising smoothness, rolling into place with a finality that was both protection and entrapment. The surface world, once sealed, would appear empty to any invader. The villages seemed abandoned, the fields left unattended, the homes standing vacant. An entire civilization had vanished in hours, leaving only the hollow surface and below the reality of thousands of people in carved halls lit by oil lamps, their breath mixing in the still air, their presence announced only by the barest sounds, the soft padding of feet on stone, the quiet comfort of parents soothing frightened children, the low murmur of prayers whispered in the darkness, and so they waited. Above, riders on horses thundered through empty valleys. Soldiers searched abandoned houses, burned crops in the fields, and eventually finding nothing of value moved on. The raiding parties or conquering armies had no idea of the city beneath their feet. The entire population that breathed in the cool, unchanging darkness, just stone widths away from where they stood. The cycle was predictable and yet never fully predictable. Some retreats lasted weeks, others lasted months. Once, it is remembered in the stories, a retreat lasted nearly a year, and by the time the stone doors rolled back to reveal the upper world again, the seasons had shifted completely. The children who had gone underground when the summer heat still lingered emerged into an autumn landscape, learning the progression of seasons through displacement rather than continuity. Generation after generation lived with this rhythm. The knowledge of how to retreat, how to organize the descent, how to survive below, this became embedded in the culture, in the structure of the society itself. The elders became the keepers of memory, the ones who remembered the exact dimensions of the passages, the location of every water source, the capacity of the grain storerooms, the order in which families should enter to avoid bottlenecks. Young people learned by watching, by helping, by experiencing the retreat themselves until it became as natural as the turning of seasons, as ordinary as breathing. Yet there was a weight to this living. Each retreat was a rupture in ordinary life, a severing of continuity. The psychological toll of perpetual readiness, of cycles of emergence and submersion, accumulated in ways that are difficult to fully comprehend from our modern vantage point. But it was this very pressure, this necessity, this repeated challenge that drove the inhabitants to perfect their underground world. Every problem that arose in the depths became a puzzle to solve. Every limitation became a problem that required engineering. The human mind, when faced with survival in the dark, becomes creative, methodical, inventive. And so the cities began not simply as refuges, but as expressions of ingenuity responding to pressure. Chambers carved with mathematical precision, shafts designed to move air through levels separated by hundreds of feet, galleries distributed according to careful calculation. It was from this crucible of fear and necessity that the remarkable achievements that follow were born. engineering solutions that would outlast the conflicts that sparked them, that would endure for over 1,000 years, quietly breathing in the earth, waiting to reveal their secrets. Imagine standing at the entrance of Derinkuyu on a warm afternoon, the Turkish sun beating down on the rocky landscape above. Now imagine descending, and descending, past carved corridors, through doorways that lead deeper into the earth, down 18 stories where the air grows cooler with each step, where the temperature becomes constant, unchanging, timeless. This is what 20,000 people learned to call home, not by choice, but through necessity. And the reason they could survive down there, the reason this wasn't a tomb but a functioning city, lay in the engineering that would have seemed miraculous to the ancient world. Engineering born not from ambition or pride, but from pure survival. Let's begin with the most iconic feature of Derinkuyu, the feature that appears in almost every historical account and archaeological documentation, the rolling stone doors. Imagine one of these massive circular discs, carved from solid rock, each one weighing between 500 and 1,000 pounds. These weren't ornamental. They were the difference between life and death. Picture the moment when an invading force reached a sealed level. They would find a tunnel blocked not by a locked gate they could force open from the outside, not by iron bars they could cut through, but by an enormous stone wheel, perfectly circular, perfectly smooth. And here was the ingenious part that made it unique to Derinkuyu and its sister cities. These doors could only be opened from the inside. The mechanics were beautifully simple. Grooves were carved into the tunnel walls on both sides, creating tracks. The massive stone disc would rest in these grooves, and when residents inside needed to seal the level, they would roll the stone toward them, sliding it deeper into the tunnel from the interior side. Someone on the outside, even with superior force, even with tools and weapons, could do nothing. They could push against the stone, they could strike it, but they could not pull it toward them. The stone, once sealed, created an airtight barrier, and if invaders somehow managed to break through one level, the next level down had its own rolling stone door, and the next, each one sealed independently. This created a defensive architecture where losing one level did not mean losing the city. The invaders would have to break through not one barrier, but many. By then, the residents deep below would have already escaped through the tunnel networks that led to other underground cities miles away. The carving of these stone doors itself was a feat of ancient engineering. The workers would first identify the location where the door would sit. Then, using only stone tools and copper chisels and the patient labour of many hands over many months, they would carve a stone disc that was perfectly symmetrical. The grooves that guided it had to be cut with absolute precision. Too narrow, and the stone would stick. Too wide, and it would fail to seal properly. The entire process required not just strength, but geometry, calculation, and an understanding of mechanics. These stone doors still exist. They still seal perfectly. Archaeologists have tested them. A single person inside can roll them with steady pressure. From the outside, they remain unmovable. Beyond the rolling doors, we must consider the invisible architecture that made Derinkuyu breathable. Over 50 ventilation shafts extended from the surface down to the deepest levels of the city. Some of these shafts dropped 180 feet or more, reaching down through solid rock to the chambers 18 stories below. This seems simple in concept, but it was anything but simple in execution. The ancient engineers had to create an airflow pattern that ensured fresh air reached every level, every chamber, every living space, even when all the rolling stone doors were sealed. Even when thousands of people, livestock and fires were burning for heat and cooking, fresh air had to keep circulating. The solution was elegantly counterintuitive. The shafts weren't simply vertical pipes. They followed a gentle spiral pattern as they descended, which helped create convection currents. Warm air inside the city would rise naturally through some shafts, creating pressure that would draw cooler, fresher air down through others. The ancient builders understood somehow the principle of thermodynamic circulation. Engineers in the modern era have analysed these ventilation systems and confirmed they work with remarkable efficiency. Even in the worst-case scenario, all doors sealed, thousands of people inside, animals below, fires burning for warmth, the city would not suffocate. The air would keep moving. It would keep renewing itself. The deeper chambers would remain breathable not for hours or days, but for months. And there was a beautiful duality to these ventilation shafts. The same shaft that carried air also carried water. On the upper levels of the city, these shafts served as wells. Residents could draw fresh water from deep within the earth, from sources that ran beneath the stone, from springs that had never been exposed to the surface and never could be poisoned or contaminated by those who attacked from above. This was the genius of the water system at Derinkuyu. The invaders might control everything above ground. They might poison every surface well for miles around. They might cut off water supplies to the settlements in the valleys, but they could do nothing to the water that flowed in the depths of the earth. The 20,000 residents had access to water as long as they remained underground. Water that was clean, fresh, constant. This water supply was positioned strategically throughout the city, with wells on multiple levels, allowing different sections to have independent access to fresh water. Some wells were designed to be shared between levels, with clever stone coverings that could be shifted to direct water flow in different directions. These coverings, when sealed, would keep the water pure and separate the populations above from those below, ensuring that even if one level were somehow breached, the water supply for the remaining levels could be protected. The layout of Derinkuyu itself reveals a city that was meticulously planned. 18 stories. Imagine descending through that many levels, watching the architecture shift as you go deeper. The uppermost levels, close to the surface, served as living quarters. This is where families would have their personal spaces, small carved rooms with sleeping platforms, areas for cooking. These upper levels also housed the stables where livestock was kept: horses, donkeys, sheep, cattle. The animals would graze on feed brought down from the surface when conditions allowed, or they would be slaughtered for meat as needed. The presence of livestock suggests that these underground shelters could sustain populations for extended periods, months at least. Grain would be needed for the animals, fodder, space for them to move. All of this was engineered into the upper levels. Moving deeper, the middle levels began to serve different purposes. Here the city became less domestic and more communal. The smell of baking bread would have filled these chambers. Communal kitchens were carved out with sophisticated ventilation systems that drew cooking smoke up through designated shafts so the entire city wouldn't become an inferno of smoke and fumes. Churches were built on these middle levels, carved directly from the stone, with baptismal fonts, altars, and enough space for communal worship. The people living underground weren't abandoning their faith. They were bringing it with them into the depths. They were maintaining ritual and spiritual practice even as they survived beneath the earth. Schools existed on these levels too, one notably on the second level. Children were still being educated. Knowledge was still being passed on. They were determined to remain civilized, to maintain their culture even as they hid from the world. The middle levels also contained vast storage rooms, grain silos carved from stone, oil presses for extracting oil from seeds, wine presses for the grapes that had been preserved or dried, cheese storage, meat storage in cooler chambers deep in the rock. The temperature below ground remains nearly constant throughout the year. In Derinkuyu, deep beneath the surface, the temperature hovers around 55 degrees Fahrenheit no matter the season. This natural refrigeration would have been one of the greatest gifts the earth provided. Food could be preserved for months, even a year or longer. The ancient residents understood this. They used the natural cold to store everything they needed to survive a long siege. Picture the moment when war came, when invaders approached from the surface. The people of Derinkuyu would gather their most precious possessions, their children, their livestock, and they would begin the descent. They would seal the rolling stone doors behind them as they went down, level by level. Once everyone was inside, once the lowest accessible level was sealed, they would wait. They would have enough food for months. They had fresh water. The air would keep circulating through the ventilation shafts. They would be cold, perpetually cool, but not freezing. They would be in darkness beyond the reach of any torchlight carried by those above. They would be isolated, but they would be alive. They would be safe. The deepest levels of Derinkuyu contained something even more remarkable: escape tunnels. These weren't simple passages. They were carefully engineered routes that connected Derinkuyu to other underground cities across the region. One tunnel in particular, the passage that connected Derinkuyu to Kaimakli, stretched nearly 5 miles through the earth. Picture travelling through that tunnel in absolute darkness, carrying nothing but a small lamp, feeling your way through stone passages carved by your ancestors, knowing that if you could reach the other end, you would find another entire city, another sanctuary. These escape routes ensured that if one city was somehow breached, the population could flee to another. It was a network of survival, an interconnected system of underground sanctuaries spread across the region, all carved from stone, all engineered to survive invasion. The daily rhythms of life in Derinkuyu were unlike anything the surface world experienced. Imagine waking in one of those upper-level sleeping chambers, the cool stone walls surrounding you, no windows, no sunlight, but perhaps the faint glow of an oil lamp. You would emerge into a corridor, and the sounds would be different here, echoing softly against stone, not the open air of the surface. You would smell bread baking from the communal kitchens. You would hear the sound of water flowing in the wells. You would perhaps see smoke rising from one of the ventilation shafts, carefully directed upward to the surface far above. You would move through passages carved smooth by centuries of feet, past chambers where other families were beginning their day, past storage rooms filled with grain and oil, knowing that this underground world was complete. It contained everything a human being needed to survive. The wine and oil presses represent perhaps the most telling detail about these underground cities. These weren't defensive shelters where people simply cowered and waited. They were functional communities where production continued. Wine would be made from grapes. Oil would be pressed from seeds and nuts. These were activities that required not just space, but also knowledge, skill, time. The people underground weren't in a state of pure survival desperation. They were maintaining economic activity, creating products, engaging in commerce perhaps even with other underground cities. They were living, not merely enduring. This is perhaps the most humbling aspect of Derinkuyu. For months at a time, for sometimes longer, 20,000 people lived beneath the earth in these carved chambers. They raised children, they baked bread, they worshipped in churches, they studied in schools, they pressed olives for oil, they fermented grapes for wine, they moved through corridors that were always cool, always silent except for the gentle sounds of human activity and flowing water. The temperature never changed, it never grew hot, it never grew frigid. The air never stopped circulating even when the doors were sealed. The water never stopped flowing from wells that reached deeper than any enemy could penetrate. Above ground, the chaos of invasion, the heat, the fighting, the desperate search for survival. Below ground, a strange and timeless existence in chambers of stone where the world above seemed like a dream. Think about what this means. Think about the engineering required. Not just the massive rolling stone doors, though they alone would have been achievement enough. But the integration of all these systems, the ventilation shafts that spiraled downward creating natural convection, the wells positioned to provide water on every level, the chambers organized by function from the practical to the spiritual, the tunnels connecting one city to another over miles of underground passage. This wasn't built quickly. This wasn't a panicked response. This was planned with the kind of long-term vision that suggests these people understood they might need to live this way for generations, that the threat they faced wasn't temporary but perpetual, that they might spend decades, perhaps even centuries, moving back and forth between the surface and the depths. The genius of Derinkuyu lies not in any single element, but in the interconnection of all elements. The rolling stones provided defense, the ventilation provided air, the wells provided water, the kitchens and presses and storage rooms provided food. The levels provided organization. The escape tunnels provided hope. The churches and schools provided meaning. All of it carved from stone. All of it engineered to work together. All of it designed to allow human beings to exist underground for extended periods without losing their humanity, their culture, their sense of community. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine descending through those levels. Feel the temperature becoming constant as you go deeper. Notice how the air, even when all the doors are sealed, remains fresh and breathable. Hear the faint sound of water moving through the stone. Sense the profound quiet of being beneath the earth, insulated from the chaos of the surface world. This is what the residents of Derinkuyu experienced. This is what the ancient engineers created for them. A space where human beings could endure, could survive, could even thrive in the depths beneath the earth. Where every necessity had been planned for, where ingenious systems worked in concert to provide safety, sustenance, and meaning, where 20,000 people found refuge not in the fleeting shelter of walls or mountains, but in the timeless, cool, quiet embrace of the living stone itself. But here we arrive at the true paradox that has puzzled archaeologists and historians for centuries. Why would 20,000 people choose to live beneath the earth? What force was so powerful, so terrifying, so relentless, that it could convince entire civilizations to abandon the sky and the sun and descend into darkness? This is not a simple question with a simple answer, and as you rest here in the comfort and safety of your home, allow your mind to wander through the possibilities. Allow yourself to sit with the mystery. The first theory, and perhaps the most widely accepted among modern scholars, speaks of military defense. Imagine standing in Cappadocia in the ancient world. This region was not some isolated corner of the world. It was a crossroads, a place where empires collided with inevitable violence. The Hittites clashed with Egypt, the Persians fought the Greeks, the Romans confronted the Parthians, the Arabs later battled the Byzantines. Wave after wave of conquest and reconquest rolled across this landscape. Invading armies came with their swords and their fire and their siege weapons. They came to conquer, to control, to dominate. And here, in the soft rhythm of my voice, consider what this must have meant to ordinary people, farmers, merchants, families, children. You would look to the horizon and see dust clouds growing larger. You would hear the distant sound of marching feet, hoofbeats, weapons clanking, and you would know that everything you had built above ground could burn, your homes could be torched, your crops could be trampled, your livestock could be stolen, your safety could evaporate in moments. But what if you had another choice? What if beneath your feet lay salvation? The underground cities offered something no army could easily destroy. A rolling stone door, massive and carefully balanced, could seal thousands of people away from the chaos above. Fire cannot reach what lies safely underground. Siege weapons cannot break into chambers carved from living rock. Invaders cannot find what they cannot see. The underground cities transformed Cappadocia into a fortress of a different kind entirely. Not walls and watchtowers above the earth, but an entirely hidden kingdom below. Consider the engineering brilliance of this defense strategy. The narrow tunnels that connected different sections of the city could be sealed off with those massive stone doors. Multiple exits meant that if one entrance was discovered and attacked, the entire population could flee deeper into the maze or emerge through another hidden exit far from the invaders. Ventilation shafts provided air and light, while remaining too small for invaders to penetrate. Vast storage chambers held supplies that could sustain thousands for months or even years. The ancient builders had created a survival machine, a place where a community could wait out any storm, any siege, any invasion. And this theory is seductive in its logic. It explains so much. It explains why the cities grew deeper and more elaborate over time, why the tunnels became more sophisticated, why each generation of inhabitants expanded and improved the underground fortress. New invasions meant new danger, and new danger meant new layers of digging, new chambers, new defences carved into the rock. But there is another theory, one that resonates with a different kind of human fear, one that speaks not of swords and soldiers, but of belief itself. This is the theory of religious persecution, and it carries with it a profound spiritual weight. In the early centuries of the Common Era, Christianity was spreading through the Roman Empire. But Rome did not welcome this new faith. The emperors saw in Christianity a threat to their power, to the established order, to the worship of the old gods, and so they persecuted the Christians with terrible fury. Nero and Diocletian and countless others ordered the arrest, the torture, the execution of those who followed Jesus. Cappadocia, it seems, became a refuge. Early Christians fleeing the Roman sword made their way to this remote region and found the underground cities. And here, in the darkness below, they discovered something miraculous. They could worship in secret. They could gather in cavern churches carved from stone. They could baptize converts in flowing water that came from underground springs. They could teach their young people the stories of Jesus without fear of Roman soldiers breaking down their doors. They could sing their hymns and pray their prayers and celebrate their faith in complete concealment. The evidence of this persecution and this refuge is written in the rock itself. Throughout Derinkuyu and the other underground cities, archaeologists have discovered elaborate churches, not simple hidden spaces, but architecturally sophisticated chambers with cruciform designs, stone altars, baptismal fonts, and most hauntingly, beautifully, frescoes painted in the rock depicting Christian symbols and stories. These are not the hasty marks of people simply hiding. These are the deliberate creations of people building an entire parallel civilization, a shadow Christianity, thriving in the depths while Rome raged above. Imagine the psychological landscape of these underground communities. Above, danger and persecution. Below, community and faith. Above, the threat of execution. Below, the celebration of eternal life. The underground became not just a refuge but a sacred space, a place where faith could flourish, protected by thousands of tons of stone. There is something in this theory that speaks to how people respond to oppression. The impulse is not always to flee entirely, but to find a place where you can persist, where you can continue to be yourself, to practice your beliefs, to maintain your identity. The underground Christians of Cappadocia did not just hide. They built, they created, they transformed a geological feature into a theological statement. We are here, we exist, we endure. And yet there is a third theory, one that is whispered by certain researchers and scholars, one that asks us to imagine an even older history. What if the underground cities were not built in response to the events we know? What if they were built to survive something far older and far more primal? What if they were built for climate catastrophe? Some researchers have speculated that the origins of the underground cities may predate all the known civilizations of the region. What if, thousands of years before the Hittites, before the Persians, before Rome, before Christianity, ancient peoples carved these chambers for a purpose we can barely fathom today? What if there was a time of extreme climate instability? What if there were periods of such intense heat, or unrelenting cold or environmental chaos that the only way to survive was to retreat beneath the earth? The temperature inside Derinkuyu remains constant at roughly 55 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 13 degrees Celsius, regardless of the season. In the summer heat, when the surface of Cappadocia bakes under the Mediterranean sun, reaching temperatures that can be nearly unbearable, those living in the depths would enjoy cool sanctuary. In the bitter winters, when the plateau freezes and snow covers the land, the underground dwellers would be protected by the Earth's own insulating embrace. What if there was a time when the climate above was even more extreme? What if there were years of unprecedented drought, or volcanic winters from massive eruptions where ash choked the sky, or some other catastrophic environmental event that made the surface world uninhabitable? Going underground would not be a choice, it would be survival. The only way to live when the world above had become hostile to human life. This theory speaks to ancient knowledge, to generations of people who somehow understood that the earth could provide sanctuary, to a collective memory of climate catastrophe that was passed down through thousands of years and encoded into the very act of building deeper, always digging deeper, always preparing for the next crisis. And finally, there is the theory that may be the most unsettling, the one that keeps archaeologists awake at night as they contemplate the sheer scale of what was built here. What if the answer is something else entirely? 200 underground cities. Some sources suggest even more that have not yet been fully explored or even discovered, all concentrated in one region, all with miles upon miles of tunnels connecting them in a vast subterranean network, built over not centuries but thousands of years, built by different civilizations, different peoples, different faiths, and yet each one expanding and improving what the previous builders had started, each generation digging deeper, each generation adding new chambers, new tunnels, new innovations. What collective memory could drive this? What ancient knowledge or ancient fear was so powerful that it compelled generation after generation to keep digging, to keep building, to keep expanding the underground, to transform an entire region into a honeycomb of hidden chambers and passages? Some archaeologists wonder if there is something in the geological record, something in the very nature of the region itself, that repeatedly drove people to seek refuge below. Others suggest that the first builders discovered some technology, some technique, some knowledge that they recorded in a way that would survive thousands of years, and this knowledge was rediscovered and implemented by each subsequent civilization. Or perhaps there is a deeper mystery. Perhaps the underground cities speak to something about human nature itself. Perhaps there is something in us that is drawn to enclosure, to shelter, to the return to the womb-like safety of the earth. Perhaps the story of Derinkuyu is the story of a people who learned, through trauma or wisdom or ancient understanding, that safety lies not in walls above but in the solid earth beneath. As you drift deeper into relaxation, allow yourself to consider each of these theories. There is no need to choose. There is no need to arrive at a final answer. The mystery itself is perhaps more valuable than any solution. The mystery reminds us that the ancient world holds secrets we have yet to fully understand, that history is not a closed book but an open question, that there are stories beneath our feet waiting to be discovered. The people who built Derinkuyu made their choice. For reasons that may have been military or spiritual or meteorological or something we have not yet conceived of, they chose the earth. They chose to go down. They chose to build an entire civilization in darkness and stone and shadow. And in making that choice, they created something that would outlast empires. Something that would inspire wonder in people thousands of years later. Something that would make us stop and ask the deepest questions about human survival and human faith and human resilience. If you're enjoying this journey through one of history's greatest mysteries, leave a comment telling me, would you spend a night in Derinkuyu? And if this is helping you relax, hit subscribe so the Calm Archive can keep bringing you these stories every single day. Imagine the first winter underground. Imagine descending the stone corridors as the last traces of daylight fade behind you, knowing you will not see the sun again for months. The darkness is not complete. Oil lamps flicker, casting shadows that dance across carved walls, but it is profound. In that darkness, without the natural cycles of dawn and dusk to anchor consciousness, time becomes strange. The mind adapts, certainly, but adaptation is not indifference. Early inhabitants of these subterranean cities must have experienced a fundamental shift in their relationship with existence itself. The surface world operated according to the rhythms of light and darkness, the seasons that mark human life and consciousness. Underground, those rhythms dissolved. Days and nights became identical. Winter and summer held no distinction. Yet it was precisely in response to this sensory deprivation that something remarkable emerged. The carved churches of Derinkuyu stand as monuments to psychological necessity as much as spiritual devotion. Walk through their chambers and you encounter frescoes painted in reds and blues and golds, pigments that seem to burn against the stone. These were not luxuries. They were lifelines. A human mind living perpetually in grey stone and shadow requires colour, requires beauty, requires something to feed the spirit when the sun cannot. The artists who created these frescoes understood this intuitively. They carved geometric patterns with obsessive precision, painted biblical scenes with devotional care, transformed blind stone into windows onto another realm. The churches became not merely houses of prayer but psychological anchors, places where the soul could feel touched by light even in the deepest darkness. Communal worship in these chambers served a function beyond the religious. Gathering together, singing in unison, witnessing the frescoed walls glow in candlelight, people reinforced their collective commitment to this subterranean existence. They reminded themselves why they had descended, what they were protecting themselves from, what dangers justified the sacrifice of the surface world. Stories would have been passed down in these chambers, narratives of invasion, persecution, chaos on the surface that made the quiet, ordered world below feel like sanctuary. The brain, denied sunlight and open sky, required these stories as surely as it required food and water. They provided meaning. They justified the sacrifice. Consider the timeline of construction. Derinkuyu was not carved in a single generation or even two. The oldest sections show evidence of work dating back possibly to the Hittites, centuries before the Christian communities that expanded and deepened these cities. This means a child born in Derinkuyu might grow to adulthood, have children of her own, and never see the work completed. Yet each generation continued. They inherited the knowledge of why the cities existed, passed down not merely in words but in lived experience. Parents took children through the stone passages and said, "This is why your grandparents dug. This is why we continue digging. This is what we are protecting ourselves from." That transmission of cultural memory is extraordinary. It suggests a consistency of threat or fear so powerful that it echoed across generations, never weakening, never becoming merely historical. A fear significant enough to justify the construction of entire civilizations within the earth. The paradox becomes more acute the moment you understand Cappadocia's surface beauty. The volcanic plateau is stunning, a landscape of impossible formations, fairy chimneys rising like dreams made stone, valleys that seem to exist in some realm between earth and sky. The sunsets paint the rock walls in rose and gold. The air is clear. the vista's extraordinary. Any human gazing at that landscape would feel the pull of it, would experience the desire to build upon it, to create cities where the sun touches skin and wind carries the scent of the earth. And yet, thousands of people deliberately rejected this, deliberately chose to descend into darkness and stone. This was not chosen lightly. This was not a casual preference. Whatever fear or knowledge drove this choice must have been formidable. Perhaps the choice was not between beauty and survival, but between two different kinds of survival. Perhaps the beauty of Cappadocia was precisely what made its people vulnerable. A landscape so stunning, so accessible, so valued. Such a place draws invaders, attracts the attention of empires, becomes contested ground. The underground cities were not flights from beauty, but refuges that allowed beauty to continue existing above ground, untouched and persistent, while protected communities flourished below. In choosing darkness, perhaps these ancient peoples were paradoxically protecting the light they could not live within. Think of it this way as you drift deeper into your own rest. Every carved chamber below ground represents a choice to preserve something above ground, to protect it by creating an alternative reality beneath the surface. Every frescoed wall, every stone corridor, every ventilation shaft and storage chamber speaks to human resilience in the face of genuine threat. The underground cities of Cappadocia exist because certain knowledge, certain fears, certain needs were deemed important enough to reject the surface world's beauty and sunlight. And as you rest now, imagine that those underground chambers are still there, preserved in stone, holding within them the accumulated spiritual and psychological needs of thousands of people who found ways not merely to survive underground, but to create meaning, beauty, and community in the darkness. Their stone is still present, their choices still echo, and in that echo, we might hear something essential about human nature, our capacity to endure difficulty when it serves something we believe in, our ability to create light even in profound darkness. As we descend deeper into the story of Cappadocia's underground world, we find ourselves drawn toward a revelation that extends far beyond the singular marvel of Derinkuyu. The underground is not a place of isolation, but rather a vast interconnected network of cities and passages that sprawl beneath the earth like the roots of an ancient tree, spreading in all directions, touching and connecting in ways that archaeologists are still discovering. This is not the story of one city carved in stone, but of an entire civilization that chose to build its world below, creating a labyrinth of human achievement that reminds us of our species' capacity to adapt, to create, and to persist in the face of uncertainty. Just 4 kilometers from Derinkuyu lies Cappadocia, the second most famous of Cappadocia's underground cities, and stepping into Cappadocia is like entering a parallel world that mirrors and yet diverges from what we have already explored. While Derinkuyu represents vertical ambition, descending ever deeper as if chasing some profound truth hidden in the Earth's core, Cappadocia spreads more laterally, with 8 levels of carved passages that flow more horizontally through the soft volcanic stone. Where Derinkuyu speaks of depth and mystery, Cappadocia whispers of community and shared spaces. The rooms here are wider, more generous in their dimensions, and the passages seem designed less for defense and more for the daily movement of families and gatherings. Only 4 of Cappaclia's 8 levels are open to visitors today, but those who venture into the darkened corridors often describe a sense of intimacy that is somehow different from Derinkuyu's more austere layout. What makes Cappadocia particularly fascinating is its relationship to Derinkuyu. Archaeological evidence and geological surveys suggest that these 2 cities were connected by an underground tunnel, stretching nearly 5 miles through the solid rock beneath the Cappadocian landscape. Imagine this. 2 complete cities, 2 entirely separate societies perhaps, connected by a passage carved through stone, allowing people to travel from one underground metropolis to another without ever seeing daylight, without ever stepping on the surface world. This connection raises profound questions about the nature of the civilization that built these cities. Were they part of a single political entity, or did different communities maintain their own distinct identities while remaining linked through these subterranean corridors? The tunnel itself speaks of intention, of planning on a scale that modern minds struggle to fully comprehend. Such a project would have required not just the labour of countless workers, but also a vision that extended beyond the immediate needs of survival into something grander and more visionary. Cappadocia may have served as a sister city to Derinkuyu, a place where populations could expand when the primary underground city reached capacity. The larger rooms and more communal spaces suggest a different purpose or a different approach to underground living. Where Derinkuyu emphasizes verticality and the drama of descent, Kaymakli emphasizes the horizontal flow of daily life, the movement of families through connected spaces, the sense of neighbors living in proximity to one another. This distinction is important because it tells us that the builders of these underground worlds were not simply following a single blueprint or repeating a standard design. They understood their own needs, they adapted their excavations to serve different purposes, and they created variations on a theme that suggests sophistication in urban planning, even in the absence of written records that explicitly describe their intentions. But the story of Cappadocia's underground world extends beyond these two famous cities. In 1972, a farmer in the region was watering his crops when he noticed something peculiar. Water was disappearing into the ground in a way that didn't match any irrigation system he'd installed. Following his water, investigating the anomaly, he discovered Ozkanak, another underground city that had remained hidden beneath layers of earth and history for centuries. The farmer's discovery serves as a reminder that we may still be uncovering the true extent of this underground civilization. Ozkanak is remarkable, not just for its existence, but for its unique architectural features that distinguish it from its better-known neighbours. Ozkanak contains something that no other underground city possesses in quite the same way: a sophisticated system of communication tubes carved through the rock between different levels. Imagine architects and engineers carving tubes, long stone passages that would allow someone standing on one level to speak clearly to someone dozens of feet above or below them, hearing their words transmitted through rock and air. These weren't simple openings. They were carefully designed acoustic conduits that functioned as a kind of ancient telephone system, allowing the coordinated management of a complex multi-level society. These communication tubes suggest a civilization that was thinking about not just the physical infrastructure of survival, but also the social infrastructure of communication and coordination. A community this size requires the ability to transmit information quickly from one level to another, to warn of danger, to call people to meetings, to coordinate the distribution of resources. The presence of these tubes indicates a level of awareness about human needs that goes beyond mere shelter. Ozkanak also contains another feature that speaks to the defensive wisdom of its builders: holes positioned strategically above doorways, carved through the stone with deliberate purpose. These were designed as conduits for pouring hot oil on invaders who might attempt to breach the city from above or force their way through the main entrances. This speaks to the eternal vulnerability of those who live underground, even in a refuge of stone. The very safety that the earth provided could become a trap if enemies found their way inside. These oil holes, these architectural features born of necessity, remind us that the people living in these cities understood violence, understood siege, understood the calculus of survival in a hostile world. They built not just to protect themselves from the elements or to hide from persecution, but to defend themselves against other human beings who might covet what they had built. The story of underground Cappadocia received a stunning addition to its narrative in 2014. During construction of a housing development in the Nevşehir region, workers discovered what many archaeologists now believe to be the largest underground city ever found. This wasn't a modest expansion of a known site. This was an entirely new city, estimated to cover 5 million square feet of carved space, potentially extending 5 kilometers beneath the surface in all directions. The implications of this discovery are staggering. Everything we thought we knew about the extent and scale of underground Cappadocia may require revision. This massive city has revealed evidence of connected tunnels that link it to other underground sites, suggesting an even broader network of interconnected cities than previously suspected. Some researchers theorize that this 2014 discovery might eventually rewrite our entire understanding of underground Cappadocia's history, its population, and its role in the wider history of the region. This newly discovered city remains largely unstudied, largely unexcavated, with most of its secrets still locked within the stone, waiting for future archaeologists to reveal them layer by layer, passage by passage. Yet even as we marvel at these discoveries, we find ourselves drawn to a larger truth about human nature itself. The impulse to go underground, to carve shelter and cities into the earth, is not unique to Cappadocia. Across the globe, in widely separated cultures and time periods, humans have been drawn to the same instinct. In Vietnam, the Cu Chi tunnels stretch for over 150 kilometers beneath the jungle, carved during the Vietnam War as supply lines and shelters for soldiers and civilians alike. In Edinburgh, Scotland, beneath the bustling modern city streets, lie the Edinburgh Vaults, chambers carved into the earth during the 18th century, used as storage, shelter and refuge. In Iran, beneath the arid landscape near Tehran, lie the underground cities of Nushabad and others, ancient refuge towns carved into the soft stone by peoples seeking protection and shelter. In Paris, beneath the glittering streets of the French capital, the catacombs stretch for miles, offering historical refuge and spiritual sanctuary. Even in America, beneath the earth in places like Wyoming and Missouri, we find evidence of ancient peoples and more recent communities who chose to build their lives underground. This worldwide human instinct to go beneath the surface appears across every continent and in every era of history. It suggests something deep in the human psyche, something that resonates across culture and time. Perhaps it is the ancient memory of caves, the first shelters that protected our ancestors from the dangers that walk the earth above. Perhaps it is the fundamental human drive to create safe space, to build walls that protect against invasion, against persecution, against the unpredictability of the external world. Perhaps it is the recognition that the earth is stable, enduring, permanent in a way that surface structures can never be. The underground offers not just shelter, but a kind of defiance against external forces. When you build beneath the earth, you are placing yourself beyond the reach of many weapons, many predators, many natural disasters. You are choosing a different relationship with the forces that shape the world above. Yet while underground cities and underground refuges exist in many places, none match the scale, the sophistication, and the sheer ambition of what was built in Cappadocia. The Cu Chi tunnels are remarkable as a wartime refuge, but they are not cities. The Edinburgh Vaults served their purpose during a particular period in history, but they were not designed to sustain a complete civilization. The Persian underground cities are impressive, but they lack the vertical depth and architectural complexity of Derinkuyu, or the interconnected network that characterizes Cappadocia as a whole. Cappadocia stands alone in the degree to which an entire civilization committed itself to underground living, in the sophistication of design, in the sheer number of interconnected cities, and in the sense of permanence and scale that these excavations convey. The people who built Cappadocia's underground cities were not creating temporary shelters. They were building a civilization complete with all the elements of a functioning society, carved into the stone with the expectation that it would endure for generations. To understand why Cappadocia achieved what no other place has quite achieved, we must turn our attention to the unique geology of the region itself. The landscape above the ground in Cappadocia is like nothing else on Earth. It is a landscape of fairy chimneys, towering formations of stone that rise from the earth like the spires of some alien city, like the fingers of a buried civilization reaching upward through the crust of the world. These formations are fantastical, dreamlike, surreal in a way that seems almost designed by nature to inspire wonder and imagination. Visitors to Cappadocia often describe the landscape as otherworldly, as if they have stepped onto another planet entirely. The fairy chimneys are created by the erosion of soft volcanic tuff, the same material that was shaped by countless volcanic eruptions millions of years ago. And here is where the story achieves a kind of poetic symmetry. The same geological forces that created those fantastical fairy chimneys above the ground created the perfect conditions for carving underground cities. The volcanic tuff that forms the fairy chimneys is the same material that the builders used for their subterranean excavations. Volcanic tuff is soft enough to be carved with tools, yet stable enough to support structures and hold its form for millennia. It is not as hard as granite, which would have made excavation nearly impossible with ancient tools. It is not as crumbly as some softer stones, which would have made the construction of durable structures impossible. Volcanic tuff represents an almost ideal building material for underground construction, and the Cappadocian builders understood this. They recognized that the geology of their region offered them both a curse and a blessing. The landscape was harsh, the climate could be unforgiving, and enemies might pursue them. But the geological composition of the earth beneath their feet offered them the raw material for creating an entire civilization in stone. This geological reality is crucial to understanding why Cappadocia became what it became. In other regions, the earth might be bedrock, too hard to excavate. In other regions, it might be loose soil, too unstable to support the kind of permanent structures that Cappadocia's builders created. But in Cappadocia, the marriage of geological conditions created the perfect substrate for ambition. The same forces that shaped the ethereal beauty of the fairy chimneys above ground shaped the possibility of the cities below. The surreal landscape and the underground cities are not separate phenomena. They are expressions of the same geological reality, carved and shaped by different forces, human and natural, into different forms. The fairy chimneys stand as monuments to geological time and natural processes. They show us the power of erosion, the gradual transformation of landscape through wind and water over millions of years. The underground cities, by contrast, stand as monuments to human will and human determination. They show us what people can accomplish when they understand their environment, when they recognize both its constraints and its possibilities, when they commit to a vision that extends beyond immediate survival into something grander and more permanent. Together, the fairy chimneys and the underground cities create a complete portrait of Cappadocia, a landscape shaped by geological time and human ambition, where the natural and the constructed, the surface and the subterranean, exist in a kind of eternal dialogue. As we consider the network of underground cities stretching beneath the Cappadocian landscape, connected by tunnels, linked through sophisticated communication systems, extending across 5 or more kilometers in some cases, we're drawn toward a meditation on the nature of civilization itself. Civilization requires more than just survival. It requires systems of communication, networks of trade and exchange, centers of religious practice, spaces for gathering and community. A civilization requires coordination across distance, management of resources, planning for the future. The fact that the builders of Cappadocia created not just one underground city, but multiple interconnected cities, suggests a degree of organization, planning, and vision that speaks to the sophistication of the people who created it. Yet as we drift deeper into contemplation of these underground worlds, we might also reflect on what drove people to build in this manner, what fears pursued them beneath the earth, what hopes sustained them in the darkness. What dreams did they cherish as they carved stone by stone, passage by passage, creating the possibility of a life lived entirely away from the sun? These are the questions that linger as we prepare to move beyond the physical reality of these spaces into the realm of interpretation, into the attempts by historians and archaeologists to understand not just how these cities were built, but why, and what they meant to the people who lived within them. The underground cities of Cappadocia offer us physical evidence of human choice, human engineering, human ambition, but they also offer us a window into the interior lives of people separated from us by centuries of history, people whose names we will never know, whose voices we cannot hear, but whose choices in stone speak across time with a power and clarity that bridges the gap between their world and ours. But this story doesn't end in the shadows of antiquity, because Derinkuyu in many ways remains undiscovered even now. The city beneath the earth is still giving up its secrets, still revealing the scope of what those ancient people accomplished. And perhaps, in understanding what we're still finding, we come closer to understanding the full truth of why they built this impossible refuge. It was 1963 when the city returned to the world. A man in Cappadocia, a Turkish man whose name has been lost to time in many accounts, decided to renovate his basement. He wanted to make his home more comfortable, to modify the space beneath his feet in the ordinary way that homeowners do. So he began to knock down a wall. Dust rose in his small cellar, and as the stone gave way he saw something that made him stop. Beyond the wall lay not solid earth, but passage, a doorway, a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. He had broken through into the past, into a vast network of rooms and corridors that had been sealed, forgotten, entombed in stone and silence for perhaps 1,000 years or more. What had been lost was suddenly, improbably found again. The local government came, archaeologists arrived with their tools and their knowledge, their cameras and their careful hands. They began to map the tunnels, to document what lay beneath this modest house. What they discovered was staggering. This wasn't a single cellar or a small complex of rooms. This was an entire city, a metropolis of stone and air carved into the earth with a precision and scale that seemed almost impossible. 8 stories down, possibly more. But here is what you should know as you rest with this thought. We still have barely touched it. 60 years have passed since that man knocked down his basement wall. 60 years of exploration, documentation, and careful archaeology. And today, in 2026, only about 10% of Derinkuyu has been excavated and open to tourists. 90% of this underground city remains sealed, unmapped, unexplored. The vast majority of the rooms and tunnels and chambers that once housed thousands of people lie still in darkness, waiting. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of people lived there, 20,000 souls in some estimates. They were born there, grew to adulthood there, raised their own children there. They knew every tunnel and every room. They could walk through the darkness with their eyes closed, their feet knowing the way. And yet today, we know almost nothing of these spaces. They remain as foreign to us as the dark side of the moon. The reason is both practical and haunting. Derinkuyu is extraordinarily difficult to excavate. The tunnels were built for people of smaller stature than we are today. Many of them are less than 5 feet tall. To explore them means crawling on your hands and knees for hours, your shoulders sometimes barely fitting through the passage. It is claustrophobic work that requires a particular kind of courage, and the earth itself is unstable. Cave-ins are a constant risk. The stone, after all, is volcanic tufa. It is soft, it crumbles. Sections of tunnel have collapsed over the centuries, blocking pathways that might once have led deeper into the city. But some of those collapses are not natural. Many tunnels have been deliberately sealed. Walls were built. Stones were carefully placed to block passage. And archaeologists must ask themselves, why? Was this done in a panic, to cut off sections of the city as some plague or danger approached? Or was it a more methodical process, a deliberate sealing off of certain areas because they were unstable, because they were dangerous, or perhaps because they contained something that needed to be hidden, something that the residents of Derinkuyu wanted future generations never to find? These are the mysteries that wait in the darkness, and until we can safely excavate deeper, we may never know the answers. When you visit Derinkuyu today as a tourist, you experience only the smallest fraction of what the city truly is. You descend through narrow passages, often having to crouch or even crawl. The walls press close. Your breath sounds loud in the silence. Electric lights have been installed now, soft lights that illuminate the carved stone. And as you move deeper, the temperature drops. The air becomes cool and still, almost unchanging regardless of the season outside. You begin to see the structures. You see small rooms that once were dwellings. You see the churches with their carved crosses still visible in the stone ceiling, still marking the places where people gathered to pray. You see the wine press rooms, the chambers where grapes were crushed and fermented in the dark. You see the ventilation shafts, those engineering marvels, carved at precise angles so that fresh air could reach even the deepest levels of the city. You see the granaries, the communal ovens, the kitchens where food was prepared for thousands, and you begin to feel the weight of it. The sense of a complete civilization functioning entirely beneath the earth. The silence of these passages is almost overwhelming. It is the silence of 1,000 years. It is the silence of people who lived and died here, who never saw the sky, who raised their children in this stone womb and taught them to fear the light outside more than the darkness within. It is a silence that gets into your bones. That makes you aware of how small you are, how brief your life is, how deep the past runs beneath your feet. But the most remarkable aspect of Derinkuyu is this. We are still discovering new chambers. We are still finding new sections. The excavation, the mapping, the exploration continues, and with every new discovery the questions deepen. Farmers in the region have found new entrances. Construction projects have uncovered tunnels that nobody knew existed. In 2014, archaeologists made a particularly significant discovery in the nearby region of Nevşehir. They found additional underground spaces, additional evidence of the vast network of cities and passages that existed beneath this landscape. And the findings suggested something almost unsettling. We have barely scratched the surface. The true extent of Cappadocia's underground cities may be far larger than we have ever realized. Modern technology is beginning to help us see what remains hidden. Ground-penetrating radar sends signals into the earth, creating images of structures that lie beneath the surface without requiring excavation. LiDAR technology, which uses laser pulses to map surfaces, is revealing underground voids that have never been documented. These tools are showing archaeologists that there may be vast chambers, vast networks of passage that remain completely unknown to us. The city beneath the earth is bigger than we thought, stranger than we thought, more complete. And what might these undiscovered chambers contain? What knowledge might be stored in those sealed and silent spaces? What artifacts, what religious texts, what records of daily life might be waiting in the darkness? There are scholars who believe that significant libraries may exist in the deepest levels of Derinkuyu, that important documents about the Cappadocian Christians and their beliefs have been preserved in the dry air, in the stable temperature, in the stone vaults beneath the earth. But these are speculation. The reality is that we simply do not know. New discoveries continue to arrive. Just within the last few years, new sections have been opened to limited exploration. New evidence of previous occupation has been found. The city is still speaking, still revealing its secrets, still reminding us that the past is not truly past. It is only sleeping, preserved beneath the earth, waiting for the moment when someone will find a doorway and knock through a wall and remember. The preservation of Derinkuyu and Cappadocia's other underground cities has become a matter of international concern. The Cappadocia region, including both the fairy chimney landscape and the underground cities, has been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This recognition brings both benefits and challenges. Tourists come to see these wonders. The revenue supports local communities. But tourism also brings wear and damage. The soft volcanic stone is eroded by millions of feet passing through. The air quality in some tunnels is degraded by the breath of visitors, by the humidity they introduce. The ancient walls have been touched by countless hands, some careful and some careless. Climate change adds another layer of threat. The underground cities have been stable for centuries because the temperature and humidity remained almost constant. But as the climate shifts, as the Earth's systems become less predictable, even these protected spaces may be affected. Water seepage, changes in ventilation patterns, shifts in the delicate balance of the underground environment, all of these are concerns for the archaeologists and conservators who work to preserve these sites. There is a particular kind of heartbreak in knowing that we are discovering these places just as we are slowly destroying them. The very act of bringing them to light, of sharing them with the world, puts them at risk. There is no perfect solution to this paradox. We cannot leave them hidden forever, nor can we expose them entirely to the wear and damage of the modern world. And so archaeologists and conservators work carefully, thoughtfully, to balance preservation with discovery. They explore new sections. They document everything with meticulous care. They develop new technologies to see beneath the stone without disturbing it. They work to understand and protect these spaces not just for ourselves, but for future generations who may want to visit Derinkuyu and feel the presence of the past. Because that is what Derinkuyu offers. It offers us a connection to people who lived so long ago that history itself seems almost mythical. It offers us the chance to stand where thousands once stood, to walk their passages, to understand how they coped with extraordinary circumstances. It offers us a window into human resilience, human creativity, human determination. The story of Derinkuyu is not finished. It is a story that is still being written, still being discovered, still unfolding in the darkness beneath the earth. With every new chamber found, with every artifact recovered, with every technological advance that allows us to see deeper without disturbing what we find, we learn more about these remarkable people and their impossible city. And as you rest with these thoughts, as the images of stone passages and carved crosses and ancient chambers fill your mind, remember that the past is not distant, it is not abstract, it is real, it is beneath your feet, it is waiting. And someday, perhaps, someone will knock through a wall and find something we have not yet imagined. If you've been enjoying this series about the places and stories that shaped human history, tell someone about the Calm Archive tonight. You might help them find the sleep they've been looking for. The underground cities remain, the stories continue, and in the darkness of those stone passages, the voices of the past still echo, still waiting to be heard. Imagine now descending into Derinkuyu as a visitor in our modern time. The entrance is deceptively modest, a simple wooden door in the middle of an ordinary Turkish town nestled between shops and homes, revealing nothing of the vast world beneath. You bend forward, and the stairs begin. They are narrow, worn smooth by millions of footfalls across the centuries, each step slightly deeper than the last, drawing you downward into quietness. The air changes immediately. The intense heat of the Cappadocian summer, that dry, relentless warmth that scorches the red rocks above, gives way to a constant, unchanging coolness. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, always. A temperature that feels like the Earth's own steady heartbeat, stable and eternal. As you descend, your fingertips brush against walls that have been touched by countless others before you. The stone is smooth here, polished not by tools but by human contact, by the palms and fingers of people from centuries past, all moving through these same passages, all seeking the same sanctuary that you now seek. The smoothness speaks of time in a way that words cannot. It is a physical record of history, written in the wearing away of stone. Each level below reveals new dimensions of wonder. You might find yourself in the wine press room, where ancient hands carved great stone basins into the floor with patient, purposeful strikes. These basins once held the harvest of vines that grew somewhere above in the sunlight, now fermented and stored in the cool, unchanging darkness. The craftsmanship is evident in every line, the proportions perfect, the angles precise, all created without modern tools or electricity. Around you are the storage chambers, where grain silos were carved directly from the living rock, designed to keep food fresh and protected for months, for years, through whatever storms or invasions might come above. You move deeper still and enter a sacred space, a church carved into the stone itself. The layout is cruciform, the shape of the cross rendered in the very architecture of the chamber. Columns rise from the floor, each one carved from what was once solid rock, now standing as pillars that have held the weight of centuries. The walls bear the marks of the chisel, and in the silence, you can almost feel the devotion of those who carved this space, who saw the stone as something to be shaped into prayer, into shelter, into community. The ventilation shafts offer moments of profound beauty. Looking upward through these narrow openings carved centuries ago, you see distant pinpoints of light. The surface world, impossibly far above, reduced to small bright spots like stars visible even in daylight. It is a strange perspective, being so far below the world, looking up at it as if at the night sky. These shafts represent the ingenuity of those who dwelt here. They understood air, circulation, the need for breath in the deep places. They solved problems that modern engineers would recognize and respect. But what modern science has recently begun to reveal is even more astonishing. Ground-penetrating radar, that remarkable technology that allows us to see through stone itself, has shown us that Derinkuyu and the other underground cities are far, far larger than the map suggested. The city that seems so vast as you walk through it, with its 8 levels, its hundreds of chambers, its networks of passages, may be only the beginning. Sealed tunnels lead to unmapped chambers. Dead ends open into new spaces when approached from different angles. The estimates are humbling. Archaeologists believe we have explored perhaps only 10 to 15% of the total underground network that exists beneath Cappadocia. Imagine that. 90% remains. Each season brings new discoveries. New chambers are found, new passages opened, new evidence of the cleverness and determination of those who created these cities. As recently as 2024, teams continued to uncover underground spaces that had remained hidden from human knowledge for centuries. Each discovery is like finding another page of an ancient book, another line of poetry in a very long story. The network is far more connected than anyone imagined. Tunnels that were thought to be isolated led somewhere, connect to something else. The picture that emerges is one of an extraordinary civilization far more complex and extensive than the surface world above would ever suggest. To stand in these places is to experience something that touches something deep within us. We live our lives upon the surface of the earth, confident in what we know, certain of the world around us. But beneath our feet, beneath the foundations of cities and homes, the earth holds secrets we have not yet imagined. There are worlds still waiting to be discovered, chambers still sealed, corridors still dark. There are stories written in stone that have never been read. There are spaces where people lived and worked and dreamed, and we are only now beginning to understand the scope of what they created. The knowledge that we are still discovering ancient cities, that archaeologists descend into the earth each year and emerge with new knowledge, new wonder. It should humble us. It should remind us that the world is far older and far stranger than we often assume, that beneath our certainty lies mystery, that even after all our technology, all our tools, all our learning, the earth still guards its secrets. And perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps there is comfort in knowing that somewhere, beyond our current understanding, beyond the edges of what we have mapped and documented, there are still places waiting, still discoveries to be made, still wonders beneath the ground, patient and eternal, holding the memories of lives lived in stone chambers, in deep silence, in the unchanging cool darkness that persists as it has persisted for thousands of years. The people who built Derinkuyu understood something that we seem to have forgotten in our modern world. They understood that safety is not something that happens on the surface. Safety happens in the quiet places, in the spaces where chaos cannot reach you, in the depths. The surface world they knew was unpredictable. It was violent. Empires rose and fell like waves. Armies marched across the plains above their heads. Fire and ash rained down from the sky. The sun scorched the earth. But deep below, in the chambers they carved from living stone, none of that mattered. The darkness down there was not frightening to them. It was a sanctuary. The stone walls held back the heat of the surface. The temperature in these tunnels never varied. It stayed cool. It stayed constant. It stayed still. The darkness was absolute and complete. And in that darkness, life continued. Children were born in these underground chambers. Babies first opened their eyes not to sunlight but to the gentle glow of oil lamps. People celebrated the major events of their lives within these walls. Weddings happened here, births happened here, deaths happened here. People worshipped in these spaces, they prayed in these spaces. They learned and studied and grew old and passed down their stories to the next generation, all beneath the earth, all in the gentle darkness, all in the cool embrace of the stone. And there is a profound lesson in this for us now, lying here in the comfort of our beds, as we drift towards sleep. Because when you close your eyes, when you let go of the world above, when you allow yourself to descend into the realm of sleep, you are doing exactly what those ancient people did. You're going underground. You are leaving the chaotic surface world behind. That surface world is still there, above you. The noise is still there. The light is still there. The demands and the worries and the endless stream of information and the things you cannot control are all still happening up there. But you don't have to be part of that anymore. Not right now. Not in this moment. You have descended below it all. Sleep is your underground city. It is the sanctuary you carved for yourself. It is the place where the outside world cannot reach you. When you close your eyes tonight, imagine that you are walking through the corridors of Derinkuyu. Picture yourself moving slowly, carefully, deeper and deeper into the earth. The air is cool on your skin. Your hand runs along the smooth stone wall as you walk. The stone is cool and comforting to the touch. Your fingers trace the marks where ancient hands carved away rock. The tunnels are lit by the gentlest light. Oil lamps flicker here and there, but mostly you're in soft shadow. The shadow is soothing. The shadow is restful. It asks nothing of you. You don't have to see anything clearly. You don't have to respond to anything. You can simply be present in this space of gentle darkness. Your breathing slows. Each breath brings in air that smells like cool stone and earth and something ancient and safe. Something that has been here for thousands of years. Something that will be here long after you're gone. This space has sheltered countless people. It will shelter you too. You continue walking deeper. The corridors grow narrower now. The chamber ceilings are lower. You are truly deep beneath the surface now. The chaos of the world above feels impossibly far away. You could not reach it even if you wanted to. The layers of rock between you and the surface are too thick. The distance is too great. You are sealed away now, protected. The massive stone doors are closed behind you. No one and nothing from the surface world can follow you down here. This is your space. This is your sanctuary. The temperature is perfect. It is exactly the right cool. The air is exactly the right freshness. Everything is exactly as it should be. Around you in the darkness, you sense the presence of the stone chambers. You know they are there even if you cannot see them clearly. These are the spaces where people slept for thousands of years. Mothers lay down beside their children in these rooms. They closed their eyes just as you are closing your eyes now. They surrendered to sleep in this darkness. They let themselves be held by the earth. And nothing bad happened to them. They were safe. They were protected. They woke refreshed. They lived full lives. And you're doing the same thing now. You're following in their footsteps. You're stepping into a tradition of rest that is older than empires, older than written history, older than anything in the world above. Your breathing is slow now, very slow. Each breath is barely there. You're moving through the deepest chambers now. There are no more sounds, no footsteps, no voices, no echoes, just the soft sound of your own breathing and the absolute, perfect silence of the stone. The silence is so complete that it feels like a weight, a gentle weight, a pressure that holds you in place. You don't need to move. You don't need to do anything. You can simply let yourself sink into this silence. Let it hold you. Let it comfort you. The walls around you in this deepest chamber are smooth, smoother than you would expect stone to be. Thousands of hands have touched these walls. Thousands of people have pressed their palms against this very rock. And you are one of them now. Your hand touches the stone. It is cool. It is solid. It is real. It has been here for thousands of years, and it will be here for thousands of years more. That is comforting somehow. That permanence. That stability. In a world where everything changes, the stone is constant. There is a small chamber ahead of you. You cannot see it in the darkness, but you know it is there. This is where people slept. This is where they rested. You can feel it in the quality of the space. This chamber was designed for rest. Every single aspect of it was designed to help people let go. The temperature, the darkness, the stillness, the safety. Everything in this space is telling you the same thing. It is telling you that you can rest now. It is telling you that it is safe to close your eyes. It is telling you that nothing bad will happen if you surrender to sleep, that the earth will hold you, that the darkness will protect you, that you are sealed away from everything that could harm you. You move into the chamber now. Your legs feel very heavy. Your entire body feels heavy in the most wonderful way. The heaviness is not a burden. It is a comfort. It is like being weighted down by the earth itself. Like gravity is pulling you deeper and deeper and deeper. Your shoulders sink downward. Your neck relaxes. Your jaw unclenches. The muscles in your face let go. The tension that you carried through the day, the tension that you did not even know you were carrying, begins to dissolve. It flows out of you and seeps into the stone. The stone absorbs it all. The stone has been absorbing the tension and the fear and the stress of thousands of people for thousands of years. It knows how to do this. It is very good at it. You can let it all go. You lie down now on a smooth stone shelf. It is exactly the right height, exactly the right firmness. Your body knows how to relax here. Your spine settles, your pelvis settles, your head finds the perfect spot. There is no pillow, but you do not need one. The stone is perfect as it is, cool and supportive and ancient and kind. You lie on your back and you look upward into the darkness, but your eyes are very heavy now, so very heavy. They want to close, they want to drift. They have been open all day long and they are tired. They deserve to rest. You let them close. You let them drift shut. There is no resistance, no struggle, just the gentle closing of your eyes and the beginning of the end of your day above ground. Your breathing is so slow now that you can barely hear it. In and out, in and out. With each breath you sink a little deeper, deeper into the stone, deeper into the earth, deeper into safety. The oil lamps around you have burned down to their lowest point. The flames are barely visible now. They flicker once, twice, and then they go out. One by one, the darkness deepens, it becomes absolute. It becomes so complete that there is no difference between what you see with your eyes open and what you see with them closed. You are in darkness either way. Perfect darkness, safe darkness, darkness that has held countless sleeping people. And here, in this deepest place, you are not alone. You are surrounded by all the people who have ever felt unsafe, all the people who have ever needed refuge, all the people throughout history who have sought shelter in darkness and found it. They are all here with you. They are all sleeping here. And you are sleeping too now. Your breathing is barely there. Your body is so heavy that you could not move even if you wanted to. And you do not want to. There is nothing in the world above that is worth moving for. There is nothing above that matters right now. Right here. In this moment. In this darkness. In this safety. In this perfect, unchanging, eternal darkness. The stone walls around you continue their ancient work. They continue to cool the air. They continue to purify the breath that comes through the ventilation shafts from far above. They continue to hold the temperature steady. They continue to protect everyone within them. They will do this all night long. You do not have to think about it. You do not have to worry about it. The stone knows what to do. The earth knows what to do. You simply have to let go. simply have to trust, simply have to close your eyes and let yourself be held. And you are being held now, held by the earth, held by the stone, held by thousands of years of tradition and safety and people who came before you and found rest in darkness. Your body is so heavy, your mind is so quiet. There are no more thoughts fighting for your attention. There is just the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, in and out, deeper and deeper into sleep. The surface world is gone now, completely gone. Sealed away behind massive stone doors, none of it can reach you here. You are safe, completely safe, absolutely safe. Nothing can harm you in this place. You're protected by layers of rock, protected by darkness, protected by the ancient knowledge of safety that built these cities and sustained the people within them. You can let go completely now. You can release every muscle, every thought, every worry, every concern. Just let it all go. Let the stone have it. The stone will take it and hold it, and eventually transform it into something harmless. Something that cannot hurt you anymore. Your eyelids are so heavy that they weigh 1,000 pounds. You could not open them even if you wanted to, and you do not want to. Closing your eyes is the only thing that makes sense anymore. Keeping them closed is the only thing that feels right. Sleep is calling you deeper now. Sleep is pulling you down like an undertow. Sleep is wrapping itself around you like a warm blanket. Like the earth itself is wrapping around you, and you are letting it. You are surrendering to it. You are allowing yourself to be taken into the deepest places. As you drift further away, know that you are safe. Know that you are protected. Know that every single part of you is being held and cared for by forces far greater and more ancient than yourself. You have done well today. You have made it through another day in the chaotic surface world, and now you have earned your rest. You have earned this sanctuary. You have earned this darkness. You have earned this peace. The last thing you notice before sleep claims you completely is the absolute silence. There is no sound in this place. No alarm clocks. No traffic. No phones ringing. No one calling your name. No deadlines. No obligations. No needs from anyone else. Just silence. Pure, complete, perfect silence. And within that silence, your breathing continues. Slower and slower, deeper and deeper, your heart beating its ancient rhythm, the same rhythm that has been beating since before you were born, the same rhythm that will continue long after you're gone, and that rhythm is enough. That rhythm is everything. That rhythm is lulling you into sleep now. Sleep. Yes, sleep is here now. You can feel it approaching like a tide, like darkness falling at sunset, like the earth turning away from the sun. Sleep is here and you are opening yourself to it. You're welcoming it. You're surrendering to it completely. There is nothing to resist anymore. No reason to resist. Only rest. Only darkness. Only peace. Only the ancient safety of the stone chambers. Only the knowledge that you are held. Only the certainty that you are safe. And so you sleep now. Deep sleep. Dream sleep. The kind of sleep that the people of Derinkuyu knew. The kind of sleep that humans have been sleeping for thousands of years. The kind of sleep that you desperately needed, that your body has been asking for, that your mind has been craving. It is here now. You are in it now. And it is perfect. Thank you for spending your evening with the Calm Archive. If this helped you relax tonight, subscribe so you never miss a new video. I upload every day and there's always something new to drift off to. Tell me in the comments. If you could explore any underground place in the world, where would you go?